All righty. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Just want to, I'll start off. I'm John Stanford, Stanford, First Deputy for the Philadelphia Police Department. So, wanted to gather today just to have a very candid conversation about an incident that occurred on Thursday, August 27th at approximately 1:45 a.m. It was a fatal auto versus pedestrian crash that occurred at the 5500 block of Rising Sun Avenue. First, I want to start out by identifying that there are two components to this. There is that are running concurrently: a crash investigation and an internal affairs investigation. You'll hear why in a few minutes. And also, just so we'll go through the steps of laying out why we are standing here for a crash investigation, even though it's a fatal. Normally, these are the type of incidents that are handled by Crash Investigation Division. But there's a component of this that is very important that we discuss as leadership of the organization. Let me start by saying that often you see us up here and we're praising our officers. Our officers do a phenomenal job each and every day with what they are doing to provide service to communities across this city. But unfortunately, this is one of those days that we're standing here at the opposite end of the spectrum. And again, I'll explain why. Taking you back to this incident that occurred on yesterday at approximately 8:30 a.m., our Crash Investigation Division was notified by the medical examiner's office that they had an individual, a victim that was pronounced a few hours before at 6:15 a.m. And they called Crash Investigation because this person would succumb to injuries that they sustained during that incident that I started out by talking about up on Rising Sun Avenue. Their purpose of reaching out, the medical examiner reaching out to Crash Investigation, is to, one, ensure that notification is made, whether it be to the family, but also to grab any information, retrieve any information from Crash Investigation that may help them as a part of their examination as it relates to how this person sustained the injuries that ultimately caused them to pass away. At that point in time, Crash Investigation was able to determine that they had no information regarding this incident. So ultimately, Crash Investigation had to begin their process, but working backwards, which would take them back out to the location of the 5500 block of Rising Sun Avenue, knowing that there was an incident that led to medics being out at that location, ultimately who transported the victim to the hospital. As a part of their investigative process, Crash Investigations began to retrieve video from some of the businesses out there, as well as video from a city camera. They were able to determine that going back to approximately 1:40 a.m. on Thursday morning, the 27th, that there was a male walking down the street on Rising Sun Avenue in the bike lane. The male was walking with an unsteady gait down that bike lane area. There is a 35th District officer that is driving down the street and observes this. Based upon what we see in the video, the officer moves over to speak with this individual. The officer has some interaction with this male through the vehicle. In terms of the male's walking, the officer is still inside of his car. At some point, this male, walking again with an unsteady gait, falls to the ground. When he falls to the ground in the bike lane area. The officer immediately pulls his car in front of him. The officer exits his vehicle and begins to engage the male in conversation. Based upon the video, it appears that the officer is having some dialogue with this male. The male at this point in time is laying out in the bike lane, partially into the running lane, but mainly in the bike lane. At some point during that encounter, the officer goes back to his vehicle, and the officer leaves that location with the victim still observed in the video laying in the street. At some point in this video, you see there is a citizen that walks over to the victim that's laying in the street and has some type of encounter with him in terms of verbal exchange. We can see that from the video. At that point in time, the citizen walks back away from the victim that's still laying in the street. Again, the male is laying in the bike lane, partially into the running lane. It's within a few moments later you see vehicular traffic beginning to proceed in that direction, and you see the first car stop, maybe observing that there's something in the street. The vehicle that's behind that first car goes around that first vehicle, ultimately driving into the bike lane and driving over that male victim. That vehicle continues to drive without stopping. And so the part of the crash investigation is that we're looking for that vehicle. Based on the video that has been retrieved, we're looking for a 2023 to 2026 green Kia Sportage X-Line series with black and chrome rims that was last observed turning eastbound on Tabor Avenue from that location. And so that's the crash investigation. We want to see, that individual that's operating that vehicle. Crash investigation wants to talk to that person. We're actively looking for that vehicle, actively looking for the person that was operating that vehicle, and also looking for any witnesses that were out there at that time of this incident. We need to speak to those individuals. And so that's the very active component of the crash investigation. Based upon what I explained to you in that moment of the male being struck by the vehicle and the vehicle continuing on, the first citizen that's out there, presumably he sees this, he now comes back over. That citizen, along with another citizen, they begin to move the victim out of the street area. They slide him over to the curb line and begin to make phone calls to 911. The same officer that encountered this male some minutes before is now the first arriving officer. Based on what we know at this point in time, the officer does not make any police report. At that point, the officer is awaiting medic arrival. That victim is transported from by medic to the hospital, and again, he is pronounced at approximately 6:15 a.m. So we're standing here as it relates to the overall incident because what we can see on the video doesn't fall in line with our practices as a police department. Very troubling to see that there is an officer that responds to this location and fails to render any type of aid to the individual prior to that individual being struck by the vehicle, being run over by that vehicle, driven over by that vehicle. And that's troubling for us. Goes against everything that we stand for. We talk about empathy, we talk about compassion as an organization, and none of those things were on display. And that's a troubling piece for us from the very beginning of this incident, to know that an officer responded to this location or somehow encountered this male, whether the male was impaired, whether the male was suffering from a medical condition. None of those things were checked, and just a failure to render any type of aid to an individual that is in the street. Very troubling, very disturbing, and to be quite blunt about it, extremely disappointing. Extremely disappointing because we would know that that male would ultimately be driven over by a car and lose his life. The second piece to that is that same officer then responds to that location after the 911 calls come in, knowing that this individual had been struck, driven over by a car, and still doesn't render aid when arriving, and to then not do any component of his responsibility to render aid, nothing as far as his responsibility to do any paperwork on this, conduct an investigation, hold the scene, none of those type of things. And so very disturbing to see that being done, and to know that we have a member of this organization that acted in that manner and failed to act in a way of what we stand for. It goes against everything that's the core values of our organization in terms of honor, integrity, and service. And again, very disappointing more than anything to know that a member of our department failed to take action that ultimately could have been a situation where this male could have potentially been on the sidewalk and not, have to be hit by a vehicle. Right now, that officer has been removed from street duty. That officer is in administrative status. And so as the internal affairs investigation will take its course, running concurrently with the CID investigation. But I felt it was important talking with Commissioner Bethel and the executive team. We talk about transparency as an organization, and we get it right 99% of the times. There are times where we get it wrong, and this is one of those times, and it's really important, I think, to each of us, not just as leadership of this organization, but personally, to stand in front of you and tell you when we got it wrong. And this is one of those times. Again, it's disappointing. It's embarrassing, to be very honest, but this is what we must do in order to continue to gain the respect, the trust, and that legitimacy with citizens in this city and people across this town. And so we're here. That's where we are. We wanted you to hear it from us, not by way of some leaked video or someone else notifying you. We wanted to tell you what we have, and that's where we're at this point. And so I will open up for any questions that you all may have.
Can you tell us anything about the officer, his identity, how long he's been on the force, anything about it?
So the officer is a 35th district officer. He has 2 years on the force. And as I said, at this point, he is placed in administrative status. Yes. So, listen, I mean, as you heard me kind of go through, there's a number of policy violations just at the surface level. Internal Affairs will do their investigation and determine specifically, in terms of what was not done. However, the empathy, the compassion, that's about being a human being. Yeah, our department policy is that you are supposed to render aid, but this just comes down to duty to protect and all of those things. But it comes down to who you are as a person. And again, it's troubling to just know, just move the person out the street and find out what's going on. And I think that's the part that bothers me the most. I know it's the part of bothers us. We had conversation about this, and it's just that empathy, that humanity, compassion, lacking in every aspect in this incident. And that's troubling for us. We wear this patch, honor, integrity, and service. And unfortunately, we don't feel that that was done that day, and that it feels like some part of what we stand for as an organization was broken. And that's the piece that we have to identify. We've identified it, we see it, and we have to take some corrective action. That's a part of what Internal Affairs now is trying to determine whether or not the body-worn camera was activated by the officer. And of course, if it was, that will be a part of the investigation. If it was not, that will also be a part of the investigation as to whether or not that was a violation of policy, which it would have been if it was not activated. So there's a criminal component of the crash investigation, and hence the reason that I started out by saying there's two different components of that. This is a leaving the scene crash investigation that turned fatal, and so that in itself is a criminal investigation. As far as the Internal Affairs investigation, we will go through the process there, and we'll see where that goes. I don't want to get into the potentials of what could happen. That would be really presumptuous of me to do that and unfair to the officer that's involved in this situation. We have a due diligence to still do a thorough investigation. Even based upon what I'm telling you, it's troubling to us, but at the end of the day, that officer still has the right to have legal counsel, still has the right to go through due process, still has the right to go through an internal affairs process, and then we will see where that ends. So we do not have, we have the name of the victim in terms of the victim has been identified as a 48-year-old black male. Unfortunately, we have not been able to make contact with his family, and so we are in the process of trying to make contact with a loved one to inform them of this tragic incident. All right. Again, thank you for coming out and hearing us into this incident. We will update you as there's more developments as it relates to the crash investigation as they go through their process of either locating the car and/or locating the operator. But again, we would ask if there's anybody that has any information regarding the vehicle, regarding the operator, or even the witnesses, the citizens that I identified that assisted this victim during this incident. We need you to come forward. We need to hear from you and allow our investigators an opportunity to talk with you. Yes, ma'am.
The 55 block, but can you be more specific? Because we were there before this press conference and we kind of looked at surveillance video of the block and we were just curious. Can you be more specific as to where?
Yeah, it's Rising Sun and Alany. Yes. All right. All right. Thank you so much.